Long ago, in a time filled with heroes, a massive war broke out that would be remembered for ages. The epic clash between the Greeks and Trojans has become legendary, passed down through generations in whispered tales and grand poems. But was Troy even real? Well, the ruins of an ancient city still stand on the western shores of Turkey, its walls once towering and proud, now worn down by time and battles. Inside those walls, over 3,000 years ago, a story unfolded that still captures our imagination today. The tales of gods and warriors, love and revenge, came to us through the songs of ancient poets. The greatest among them was Homer, whose works, the Iliad and the Odyssey, painted vivid images of golden-armored heroes and divine beings, shaping the fates of mortals with their whims. Before these stories were written down, they lived in the hearts of bards who sang them by firelight, enchanting audiences with adventures that were both amazing and terrifying. Imagine a world where gods came down from Mount Olympus to mingle with humans. A world where honor was worth more than life itself, where glory in battle was the ultimate goal, and where a single stolen bride could send 1,000 ships sailing across the wine-dark sea. This was the world of the Trojan War. The story is packed with every shade of human emotion, passionate love and bitter hatred, towering pride and deep sorrow, blinding rage and gentle mercy. For 10 long years, the greatest warriors clashed beneath the walls of Troy. There was wise Odysseus with his clever tricks, Achilles whose anger was as famous as his fighting skills, noble Hector, the defender of his city, and Helen, whose beauty was said to rival the goddesses. Their names echo through time, remembered long after countless kings and kingdoms have faded away. The impact of this war never truly disappeared. The stories born from it have been retold and reimagined countless times, inspiring everything from ancient Greek tragedies to modern films. They raise timeless questions about fate and free will, the steep cost of honor, and what it really means to be a hero. In many ways, the tale of Troy marks the start of Western literature itself. Our tale does not begin with the thunderous clash of bronze weapons or the screams of dying men. Instead, it starts with a celebration, a divine wedding feast that would plant the seeds of conflict and tragedy. The palace of King Peleus gleamed with golden light on his wedding day. The mortal king had won the heart of Thetis, a silver-footed sea nymph of extraordinary beauty. The gods themselves descended from their mountaintop palaces to attend the celebration, bearing gifts and blessings for the unlikely couple. Zeus, lord of thunder and king of the gods, reclined at the head, and beside him sat his wife, Hera, queen of heaven. All the Olympians had come, all save one. Eris, goddess of discord and strife, had received no invitation. Her heart burned with bitter resentment. If she could not share in the celebration, she would ensure the revelers remembered her nonetheless. As the feast reached its height, a golden apple rolled across the banquet table. The fruit gleamed impossibly bright, catching every eye in the hall. Upon its lustrous skin, 3 words had been inscribed, "For the fairest." The celebration faltered as 3 goddesses rose from their seats, each convinced the apple was meant for her. There was Hera, the proud queen of the gods; Athena, the wise goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare; and Aphrodite, whose beauty was unmatched throughout creation. The dispute quickly grew heated, and the 3 goddesses appealed to Zeus to judge between them. But the king of gods was too wise to make such a dangerous choice. Instead, he appointed a judge from among mortals, a young prince who watched his flocks on the slopes of Mount Ida. This shepherd prince was Paris, son of King Priam of Troy. Raised among shepherds after his mother's premonition led to him being left for dead as an infant. This forgotten prince, handsome and innocent of the world, would make a judgment that would shake the foundations of nations. Hermes, the fleet-footed messenger of the gods, led the three rival goddesses to the mountainside where Paris tended his sheep. Each goddess, eager to win the golden apple, offered Paris a gift beyond mortal, imagining if he would choose her. Hera promised to make him a king among kings. Athena offered to make him the wisest of all warriors. Last came Aphrodite, and when she spoke, her voice was like honey. "What use is power or glory," she asked softly, "if your bed remains cold at night? Choose me, Paris, and I will give you the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Helen of Sparta will be yours." Paris, young and filled with the passions of youth, hardly hesitated. He handed the golden apple to Aphrodite, naming her the fairest of the three. In that moment, on a quiet mountainside, the first stone in an avalanche of war was set loose. Hera and Athena departed in anger, their wounded pride festering into hatred for Paris and, by extension, his home city of Troy. Aphrodite, delighted with her victory, reminded Paris of her promise. Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world, would be his, despite the fact that she was already married to King Menelaus of Sparta. Not long after, Paris's true identity was discovered, and he returned to Troy to be welcomed by his father, King Priam. When Paris announced his intention to visit the kingdoms of Greece, supposedly on a diplomatic mission, his father gladly gave him ships. But Paris had only one destination in mind: Sparta, where the legendary Helen lived as queen. Helen and Paris. In Sparta, King Menelaus received the Trojan prince with all courtesy, unaware of the designs Paris harbored for his wife. For several days, the Trojan delegation enjoyed Spartan hospitality. Paris charmed the court with tales of his homeland, all while his eyes returned again and again to Helen. Whether Helen fell in love with Paris, or was merely enchanted by Aphrodite's divine magic, the ancient sources disagree. What is certain is that when Menelaus was called away, Paris seized his opportunity. He and Helen boarded a Trojan ship under cover of darkness, taking with them a considerable portion of Menelaus's treasure. By the time Menelaus returned home to find his wife and wealth gone, the Trojan ships were already crossing the wine-dark sea toward the distant shores of Asia Minor. The king's rage shook the very foundations of his palace. The abduction or elopement was not merely a personal betrayal, but an insult to Greek honor. Menelaus wasted no time. He sent messengers to his brother Agamemnon, the most powerful king in Greece, and reminded all the former suitors of Helen of their oath to support her marriage against any who would break it. The kings of Greece would go to war, and Troy would be their target. The Trojans, meanwhile, were also preparing for war. Hector, Paris's eldest brother and Troy's greatest warrior, took command of strengthening the city's already formidable defenses. Allies were called from neighboring kingdoms in Asia Minor, and stores of food were gathered. Paris, for his part, spent his days with Helen in the comforts of the palace, confident in Troy's walls and in divine favor. A year passed before the first Greek embassy arrived. Odysseus, the wily king of Phthia, and Menelaus himself came to Troy not with an army, but with words. "Return my wife and the treasure that was stolen," Menelaus demanded. "Do this, and there need be no blood spilled between our peoples." But Paris, with Helen at his side, refused. "Helen is my wife now," he declared, "and I will not give her up." The embassy ended in failure. With the failure of diplomacy, both sides prepared for war. The Greeks expanded their beachhead, building a fortified camp that stretched along the shore with their ships, drawn up on the beach behind palisade walls. The Trojans gathered their forces within their city. From the walls of Troy, Helen watched the Greek camp taking shape on the distant shore. The ancient Thales are silent on her thoughts, leaving only the image of a woman watching from the walls as armies gathered to fight in her name. The gathering of the Greek forces. The harbor at Aulis filled with ships from every corner of Greece. The greatest military force the ancient world had ever seen was assembling, and at its head stood Agamemnon. Not all of the Greek kings had come willingly. Odysseus, the clever ruler of rocky Ithaca, had feigned madness when Agamemnon's messengers arrived. But when a clever ally placed Odysseus's infant son in the path of a plow, Odysseus swerved to avoid his child, revealing his sanity and his deception. Bound by his oath, he had no choice but to join the expedition. The greatest challenge was finding Achilles, a young warrior whom prophecy named as essential to Greek victory. His mother, Thetis, knowing that war meant death for her beloved son, had hidden him on the island of Skyros disguised as a girl. Odysseus, now committed to the cause, devised a plan to reveal Achilles. Disguised as a traveling merchant, he brought gifts for the king's daughters, but among them he included a magnificent sword and shield. While the girls admired the trinkets, Achilles reached instinctively for the weapons, revealing a warrior's instinct that no disguise could hide. His identity uncovered, he too joined the gathering forces, bringing with him his loyal friend Patroclus and a contingent of elite warriors, the Myrmidons. Yet despite this unprecedented gathering of power, the fleet remained in the harbor, unable to sail. For weeks, the winds refused to blow. The waters of the bay lay flat as polished bronze. Desperate for a solution, Agamemnon turned to Calchas, the expedition's prophet. Calchas's face was grave as he delivered his message. Artemis, goddess of the hunt, held back the winds. She demanded a sacrifice for an offense against her, and would accept nothing less than the life of Iphigenia, Agamemnon's eldest daughter. The high king's face turned ashen at these words. He raged against the prophecy, but as the days passed with no change in the winds, his resolve weakened. Finally, he sent word to his wife, Clytemnestra, to bring Iphigenia to Aulis, under the pretense that she was to be married to Achilles. It was a cruel deception, one that would later bear terrible fruit. The accounts of what happened next differ. Some say that Iphigenia willingly offered herself for sacrifice to ensure Greek victory. Others say she was taken by force to the altar. A third tradition holds that at the final moment, Artemis herself intervened, replacing Iphigenia with a deer and spiriting the girl away to serve as a priestess. Whatever the truth, after the ceremony was completed, the winds began to blow. As the sun rose the following morning, the greatest armada the world had ever seen moved out of the bay at Aulis, ship after ship passing between the headlands, their decks crowded with armed men gazing toward the horizon. They left behind a grieving mother, Clytemnestra, whose heart now burned with hatred for her husband, a hatred that would one day claim Agamemnon's life. Journey to Troy. The vast Greek fleet sliced through the Aegean, a floating city of timber and canvas. Their journey wasn't a straight shot. They took a winding route from one island to another. Not every island rolled out the welcome mat. Some, scared of Trojan retaliation, turned them away without supplies. Others, tied to Troy, put up a fight. The first blood of the war wasn't spilled beneath Troy's walls, but on these scattered islands, where the Greeks seized what wasn't freely offered. Achilles really made a name for himself in these early skirmishes. On the island of Tenedos, when local forces ambushed the Greeks, this young warrior led a counterattack that sent the defenders running and captured their main settlement. It was here that he claimed Briseis, a prize that would later spark his withdrawal from the war. The fleet took a break at the sacred island of Lemnos, where Philoctetes, the bearer of Heracles' mighty bow, faced a tough break. He got bitten by a venomous serpent, and the wound turned nasty, creating a stench so foul that his fellow Greeks couldn't stand to be around him. Following Odysseus's advice, Agamemnon made the harsh call to leave Philoctetes behind on Lemnos. This cruel decision would come back to haunt the Greeks when they later had to seek out the man they had cast aside. As they neared Trojan waters, a crucial question loomed. Where should they land? Troy's coastline had few suitable beaches for such a massive force, and the Trojans would definitely be watching. Odysseus suggested they first try diplomacy to sort things out. So it was settled. A small advanced fleet would head to the Trojan coast, while the main force would hang back among the scattered islands, staying out of sight from Trojan scouts. Odysseus, known for his silver tongue, would lead a mission to Troy once they had a beachhead. The advanced ships, under Protesilaus' command, approached the Trojan shore at dawn. Trojan archers, hidden among the coastal rocks, kept a watchful eye on the Greek vessels. As the first ship grounded on the beach, Protesilaus, eager to be the first to set foot on Trojan soil, jumped from his ship with his shield raised high. Unfortunately, an arrow found its way through the gap between his shield and breastplate. He staggered forward 3 steps onto Trojan land before collapsing. In that moment, he fulfilled an old prophecy. The first Greek to touch Trojan soil would be the first to die. Despite this grim start, the advanced force pressed on, pushing back the Trojan defenders and securing enough beach for the main fleet to land. Word was sent to Agamemnon, and soon the entire Greek armada approached the shore. Odysseus, with Menelaus at his side, stepped up to Troy's mighty gates, carrying olive branches as symbols of peace. In the grand hall of Troy, before the gathered court, Odysseus spoke with the eloquence he was known for. He demanded that Paris return Helen and the stolen treasures, and make fair reparations for breaking sacred hospitality. But Paris, with Helen by his side, spoke with the kind of confidence that only youth can muster. Helen is my wife now, by her own choice, and with the blessing of Aphrodite herself. What kind of Trojan would give up what he loves just because of Greek threats? The embassy ended in failure. With diplomacy out the window, both sides geared up for war. The first major battle was on the horizon. For 9 long years, this scene would play out repeatedly. A cycle of advances and retreats, small victories and defeats, moments of heroism and tragedy. Neither side could gain a clear upper hand. The Greeks, despite their numbers, couldn't break through Troy's formidable walls. The Trojans, even with some wins in the field, couldn't push the invaders back into the sea. As the war dragged on, it spread beyond the plain of Troy itself. Realizing that a direct assault on the city might be a tough nut to crack, Achilles led raids against Troy's allies and supply lines with his Myrmidons, the elite warriors who followed him with fierce loyalty. According to Homer, he attacked 12 cities by sea and 11 by land. Each city fell to his wrath, adding to his legendary status and filling the Greek camp with treasure and captives. Meanwhile, Odysseus and Diomedes were busy leading scouting missions and ambushes, using their wits where sheer strength might not cut it. On one of these missions, they managed to capture a Trojan spy who spilled valuable info about Troy's defenses and allies. But the Trojans weren't just sitting back and taking it. Hector, Troy's mightiest warrior, led daring sorties against the Greek camp. With his distinctive helmet adorned with a horsehair plume, he became a rallying point for Trojan forces and a figure of dread for Greek soldiers. Unlike Paris, who was more interested in the comforts of the palace than the hardships of war, Hector embodied the true spirit of Trojan nobility. A devoted husband to Andromache, a loving father to his son Astyanax, and a relentless defender of his city. The gods themselves took sides in this epic conflict. Apollo, the god of archery, favored Troy, along with Aphrodite and Ares. On the Greek side, Hera and Athena, still bitter over Paris's judgment, stood with them, as did Poseidon, who held a grudge against Troy. Zeus, the father of gods and men, tried to stay neutral. Divine intervention showed up in various ways, from a god deflecting an arrow meant for a favored hero, to the immortals appearing on the battlefield in disguise to shift the tide of battle. Life in the Greek camp settled into a routine over the years. The kings still gathered in Agamemnon's tent to discuss strategy, but more often than not, these meetings turned into shouting matches as frustration mounted. Inside Troy, conditions slowly worsened as the siege dragged on. The constant state of alert wore on both civilians and soldiers alike. Helen's role in Troy became more complicated. Some Trojans blamed her for their suffering, while others, including the elderly King Priam, treated her with kindness, viewing her as a victim of fate rather than the source of their troubles. In the 8th year of the war, a potential game-changer appeared in the form of Rhesus, king of Thrace, who came to Troy's aid with fresh troops and stunning white horses. A prophecy claimed that if these horses drank from the river Xanthos and grazed on Trojan grass, the city would never fall. Learning this through spies, Odysseus and Diomedes decided to undertake a night mission into the Trojan camp. Under the cover of darkness, they took out the sleeping Rhesus and many of his men, then snatched the prophetic horses before they could fulfill the conditions that would have made Troy invincible. This back and forth of raids and counter-raids could have gone on forever, but then a fateful quarrel erupted in the Greek camp. A dispute between kings would change the course of the war and lead to the downfall of its greatest heroes. The wrath of Achilles. During a successful raid on a town allied with Troy, the Greeks captured 2 noble women, Chrysis, the daughter of a priest of Apollo, and Briseis, who was given to Achilles. Agamemnon claimed Chrysis as his prize, but soon after, a plague hit the Greek camp. Calchas, the seer, revealed the cause. Apollo was punishing them for Agamemnon's enslavement of the priest's daughter. Reluctantly, Agamemnon agreed to return Chrysis, but his pride demanded compensation. "If I must lose my prize," he declared, "then I'll take one of yours instead." His gaze landed on Achilles. "I will take Briseis, your captive, to replace the woman I've lost." Achilles' hand flew to his sword. "You sit back while better men bleed for your cause, and now you want to steal what I've earned with my own hands." He spat. Only Athena's intervention stopped him from striking down the High King. Instead, the greatest warrior of the Greeks made a fateful decision. "Take her," he said at last, his voice as cold as winter. But know this, my men and I will fight no more in your war. Let's see how you fare against Hector without Achilles at your side. True to his word, Achilles withdrew to his tent and his ships. For days he brooded by the shore, watching as the tide of battle turned against the Greeks. Without his strength to tip the scales, the Trojans sensed the Greeks' disarray and pressed their advantage. Hector led increasingly bold attacks, driving the invaders back to their ships. As flames began to lick at the first Greek vessels, pushed burning toward the fleet by Trojan forces, the consequences of the quarrel between kings became clear. Yet Achilles wasn't entirely without compassion. As Hector's forces pressed closer to the heart of the Greek camp, he allowed his beloved friend Patroclus to borrow his distinctive armor and lead the Myrmidons into battle. "Wear my armor," Achilles told him. "The Trojans will think I've returned to the fight and may lose heart. But listen carefully. Push them back from our ships, but go no further. Don't pursue them to the walls of Troy." Patroclus's appearance in Achilles' armor had the desired effect. Seeing what they thought was the dreaded Achilles returning to battle, many Trojan warriors broke ranks and fled. Patroclus led the Myrmidons in a fierce counterattack, pushing the Trojans back from the burning ships. But in the heat of combat, caught up in success, Patroclus forgot his promise. He pressed forward, chasing the retreating Trojans across the plain toward their city. 3 times Patroclus charged the walls of Troy, and 3 times Apollo himself pushed him back. But lost in battle frenzy, Patroclus ignored the divine warning. As he fought near the walls, the gods struck him from behind, stunning him and knocking his helmet off. In that vulnerable moment, a Trojan warrior named Euphorbus speared him in the back. Wounded and disoriented, Patroclus stumbled backward directly into Hector's path. Troy's greatest champion didn't hesitate. His spear drove deep into Patroclus's unprotected belly. With his dying breath, Patroclus managed a prophecy of his own. "Enjoy your victory while you can, Hector. Death already stands behind you, waiting. Achilles won't rest until you lie as I do now." A brutal fight erupted over Patroclus's body and the armor of Achilles that he wore. In the end, Menelaus and Ajax managed to carry Patroclus's broken body back to the Greek camp. But Hector retreated to Troy with Achilles' armor as his prize. When word reached Achilles that Patroclus had fallen, his grief knew no bounds. He threw himself to the ground, pouring dust over his head and tearing at his hair. His anguished cries echoed across the camp, chilling the blood of all who heard them. His mother, Thetis, rose from the waves in response to her son's pain. She found him beyond consolation, consumed now by a new kind of wrath. Not the cold anger he had felt against Agamemnon, but a white-hot fury directed at Hector and all of Troy. "I will return to battle," Achilles vowed. "I won't eat or drink until Patroclus is avenged and Hector lies dead by my hand." Since Hector now had Achilles' armor, Thetis journeyed to Olympus itself, to the forge of Hephaestus, the divine craftsman. Moved by her plea, the lame god worked through the night at his magical forge. By dawn, he created the most magnificent armor ever worn by a mortal. When Thetis delivered this divine gear to her son, Achilles wasted no time. He called for an assembly of the entire Greek army and formally ended his quarrel with Agamemnon. "The anger that divided us has cost too much," he declared. "I return to battle now, not for you, Agamemnon, but for Patroclus." When Achilles finally charged onto the battlefield in his gleaming new armor, The effect was terrifying. Trojans who had been confidently pursuing the Greeks now turned and ran in panic. Achilles drove the surviving Trojans back to their city like frightened cattle. At the gates of Troy, only one man remained outside as the massive doors swung shut behind the retreating army. Hector, Troy's champion, waited alone to face the approaching storm. His father, King Priam, and his mother Hecuba pleaded with him from the walls to come inside, but Hector stood his ground. "I cannot hide behind walls while others die for me," he said. As Achilles drew nearer, however, even Hector's courage faltered. The man approaching him seemed more than human. At the last moment, Hector's nerve broke, and he ran. 3 times they circled the walls of Troy, Achilles in pursuit, Hector in flight. The duel between the 2 greatest warriors of their age was brief but terrible. The outcome was never truly in doubt. Achilles' spear found the gap at Hector's throat, one of the few vulnerable spots in the armor that had once belonged to Achilles himself. As Hector lay dying, he made a final request. "I beg you," he said, "don't leave my body to be devoured by dogs and birds. Accept the ransom my father will offer, and let him give me proper burial rites." But Achilles, still consumed by grief and rage, was beyond such human considerations. "I wish my fury would drive me to cut your flesh and eat it raw for what you've done. No ransom will convince me to return your body." With his last breath, Hector prophesied, "Remember, on the day Paris and Apollo bring you down before the Cæan gates, remember my words." After Hector's death, Achilles' treatment of his enemy's body shocked even his fellow Greeks. He pierced the fallen hero's heels, threaded them with leather thongs, and dragged the corpse behind his chariot, circling the city walls. For 11 days, he continued this desecration. The gods themselves were outraged by this violation of sacred custom. Zeus sent Thetis to her son with a message: "You have angered the immortals with your excessive vengeance. The time has come to accept ransom and return Hector's body to his people." On the 12th night, guided by Hermes, King Priam of Troy made his way secretly into the Greek camp and to Achilles' tent. The old king knelt before the man who had killed so many of his sons, most notably his beloved Hector, and kissed the hands that had brought him such grief. "Remember your own father, Achilles," Priam said, his voice steady despite his sorrow. "He is old as I am old, and he waits for a son who may never return. At least he can hope, while I kneel before the killer of my children. Have pity, if not for me, then for the memory of your own father." These words penetrated Achilles' armor, grief, and rage. For the first time since Patroclus's death, he wept, not just for his friend, but for all that had been lost. Together, the old king and the young warrior grieved for their respective losses, finding a moment of shared humanity amid the waste of war. When dawn came, Achilles had Hector's body washed, anointed with oils, and wrapped in fine cloth. He granted the Trojans 12 days of peace to conduct funeral rites for their champion, a brief respite in a war that had already consumed nearly a decade and the lives of countless heroes. The death of Patroclus and Hector. The 12 days of peace for Hector's funeral felt like a fleeting dream in the long nightmare of war. But when the truce was over, the fighting kicked back into high gear. Achilles, aware that his own death was looming, fought with a wild mix of rage and acceptance. Every morning, he'd suit up in his divine armor, and each day, he'd take down scores of Trojan warriors. Then at night, he'd return to his tent, having survived another day, All of that prophecy hung over him like a dark cloud. The battle had shifted decisively in favor of the Greeks, but victory still felt out of reach. Just when it seemed like things might settle down, new heroes showed up to strengthen Troy's defenses. From the east came Penthesilea, the queen of the Amazons, leading a fierce group of women warriors who were just as skilled and brave as any man. She and her Amazons brought a spark of hope to Troy, but sadly, Achilles ended up killing their queen. Some say that in that tragic moment, Achilles fell for her. Then came another unexpected ally for Troy, Memnon, the king of Ethiopia and son of the dawn goddess Eos. His arrival, with a strong force behind him, shifted the tide of battle once again. Memnon was a formidable warrior, second only to Achilles, and he took down many Greek heroes. Heartbroken over the loss of a dear friend, Achilles sought out Memnon for a duel. Their battle was intense and evenly matched, but in the end, Achilles drove his blade beneath Memnon's breastplate. As Memnon fell, his mother Eos wept tears that became the morning dew. With each victory, Achilles was inching closer to his fated doom. As the Trojans retreated toward their gates after Memnon's defeat, Paris, who had sparked the war, but rarely shone in battle, stood with Apollo at the sea-end gate. As Achilles chased the fleeing Trojans, Paris drew an arrow and shot it, guided by Apollo, to the one vulnerable spot on Achilles' body, his heel, the only part not dipped in the river Styx when his mother tried to make him immortal. The arrow struck true, piercing the tendon that would forever bear Achilles' name. The great hero stumbled and fell, unable to believe that his end had come not from a worthy opponent in fair combat, but from a distance shot by the very man whose actions had ignited the war. Achilles' death plunged the Greek camp into deep mourning. For 17 days, the funeral games held in his honor paused the fighting. His divine armor became the center of a fierce dispute between Ajax and Odysseus, both of whom had risked their lives to recover his body. When the Greek leaders awarded the armor to Odysseus for his cleverness and strategy, Ajax went mad over the slight to his honor. In his madness, he slaughtered a flock of sheep, thinking they were his fellow Greeks. When he finally came to his senses and realized what he'd done, shame drove him to take his own life. In just a short time, the Greeks had lost their 3 greatest warriors, Patroclus, Achilles, and Ajax. Victory seemed more distant than ever. That's when Odysseus, whose mind had been sharpened by a decade of endless warfare, came up with a plan so bold that it could either lead to Troy's downfall or spell disaster for the Greek forces. "We can't defeat Troy through sheer strength," he told the gathered Greek leaders in Agamemnon's tent. "Their walls are unbeatable, built by the gods themselves. But what if we could trick the Trojans into bringing us inside those walls willingly?" The plan Odysseus laid out that night, involving the famous wooden horse, would go down in history as one of the greatest military deceptions ever. The Trojan Horse and Fall of Troy. The wooden horse loomed large on the plains outside Troy, a massive and imposing sight. When the Trojan scouts first caught sight of it, they approached with caution, puzzled by this strange object left behind on the otherwise deserted beach. The Greek camps that had once lined the shoreline for a decade were now nowhere to be seen. Word spread quickly through the city. Citizens rushed to the walls, hardly daring to believe that their long nightmare might finally be over. On the beach, the Trojans found it deserted except for one lone Greek soldier tied to a post. His name was Sinon, handpicked by Odysseus for his quick thinking and persuasive skills. He was bruised and bloodied, seemingly left behind in the Greeks' hurried retreat. Sinon spun a tale that was a true masterpiece of deception, playing on the Trojans' pride and their fears about the gods. "The horse is an offering to Athena," he explained. "The Greeks made it so big that you can't bring it through your gates, ensuring it stays outside your walls. There's a prophecy. If you take possession of this offering to Athena, you'll one day invade Greece and destroy our cities. But if you damage the horse, Athena's wrath will come crashing down on Troy." The Trojans were left debating what to do with this strange gift. Some, like Thymoetes, argued for bringing the horse inside as a trophy of their victory. Others, feeling more suspicious, suggested burning it. Laocoon, a priest of Apollo, voiced the strongest objections, shouting, "Have you lost your minds? This is surely a trick. Whatever it is, don't trust it." To drive his point home, Laocoon hurled his spear at the horse's flank. The hollow thud that echoed back should have confirmed his fears, but just then the gods intervened. As Laocoon returned to the shore to sacrifice a bull, two enormous serpents emerged from the sea. With terrifying speed, they wrapped themselves around the priest and his two young sons. The horrified Trojans watched as the serpents crushed the three to death. Stunned, they interpreted this as divine punishment for Laocoon's assault on the horse. "The priest was struck down for his impiety," they murmured. "The horse must truly be sacred to Athena." Then came another sign. Helen's sister-in-law, Cassandra, blessed with prophetic sight by Apollo, but cursed to never be believed, ran through the streets, screaming that the horse would bring destruction. But as always, her true prophecies were dismissed as madness. With these apparent divine judgments weighing on their minds, the Trojans made their fateful choice. They decided to bring the massive horse into the city. But the city gates were too small to admit such a structure. In their eagerness, the Trojans did what 10 years of Greek siege had failed to accomplish. They breached their own walls, tearing down a section to create an opening big enough for the horse. That night, Troy erupted in the first real celebration it had known in a decade. Wine flowed freely, music filled the streets, and even the guards drank their fill. Inside the wooden horse, the chosen Greek warriors endured a day of cramped discomfort. The hollow belly concealed Menelaus, Diomedes, Neoptolemus, the son of Achilles, Ajax the Lesser, and other notable fighters. When the city finally fell silent, Sinon crept to the horse and gave the signal. One by one, the warriors descended on ropes to the street below. Their first targets were the guards at the main gates, who were quickly taken out. As those gates swung open, Sinon lit a massive signal fire on the walls, a beacon visible far out to sea, where the Greek fleet had been hiding behind a nearby island. With surprising speed, the ships that had seemed to abandon the siege returned, loaded with soldiers eager for the final assault. The Greeks who had hidden in the horse began their deadly work. What followed was not a battle, but a massacre. The Trojans, caught completely off guard and still half drunk from their celebration, had no chance. King Priam, awakened by the sounds of slaughter, donned his armor for the first time in years. His end came not in honorable combat, but in sacrilege. Neoptolemus, proving himself even more savage than his father Achilles, chased the aged king to the very altar of Zeus and cut him down. In the house of Deiphobus, the brother of Paris, who had married Helen after Paris's death, Menelaus finally confronted the woman who had been the cause of the entire war. Menelaus burst into their bedchamber with his sword raised, intending to kill both his wife and her new husband. Deiphobus died quickly, but when Menelaus finally stood face to face with Helen, something unexpected happened. Whether it was her legendary beauty, her skillful pleading, or some remnant of the love he once felt for her, Menelaus found he could not strike the fatal blow. As dawn broke over Troy, the destruction was nearly complete. The royal palace, which had stood for centuries, was consumed by flames. The streets were filled with the bodies of the dead and the cries of the dying. Those Trojans who had survived, primarily women, children, and the elderly, were being herded toward the beach, destined for slavery in distant Greek lands. Among these captives was Andromache, widow of Hector. Her grief, already immeasurable from her husband's death, was compounded by unimaginable horror as she watched Greek soldiers take her young son Astyanax, Hector's only child, and throw him from the high walls of the city. Hecuba, once queen of the wealthiest city in Asia, was reduced to a wailing captive. She had lived to see nearly all of her many children die. The fall of Troy was completed as the sun climbed higher in the sky. The Greeks gathered their plunder and captives on the shore, preparing to load them onto the waiting ships. The city continued to burn behind them, black smoke rising in a column, a funeral pyre for a civilization. After 10 long years, the Trojan War was finally over. The Greeks had achieved their stated goal. Helen was recovered, and Troy was punished, but at a terrible cost. Thousands of their countrymen lay buried in foreign soil. Those who survived were changed, hardened by war, and haunted by the atrocities they had committed. And for many, the true hardships were just beginning. The voyage home would prove as deadly as the war itself. The destruction of Troy marked the end of an age, the twilight of heroes. The bards would keep these tales alive for centuries, ensuring that names like Hector and Achilles, Odysseus and Agamemnon would never be forgotten. And what of Troy itself? The city that had stood proud for centuries was reduced to smoldering ruins. Yet, even in destruction, it achieved a kind of immortality. Though its walls were leveled and its towers toppled, Troy would live forever in the words of poets, a cautionary tale of pride and folly, of divine caprice and human suffering. And so, our journey into the past comes to a quiet close. If you're still awake with me, I hope this tale brought you a little peace. If you enjoyed our time together, a gentle like lets me know. And subscribing means you'll never miss the next calm adventure. If you know someone who might need a little comfort tonight, feel free to share this story with them. Thank you, truly, for being here. Until next time, I wish you the sweetest dreams.